Good morning, everyone. So we have our first webinar of May, I think this one is. And today I have my darling friend and specialist coach, Sue Sanford, and she's going to be running us a webinar about neurodiversity and untapped potential. So Sue specifically enjoys working with people who are wired differently to what's considered typical, I guess, and especially those working with the talents and challenges that come with neurodiversity. So, Sue, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and we will get started. So if anyone's got any questions along the way, sorry, Sue, I'm checking them on my phone, so if you keep seeing me look around for that, I'll feed all your questions into Sue. Over to you, my love.
Okay, thank you very much. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. Good morning, everybody. I can't see you, but I'm waving at you anyway.
You've got lots of people on.
Right, so neurodiversity, and what the hell is that? Just to let you know, this is actually International Neurodiversity Week, but if you don't know what neurodiversity is, that's not going to mean a lot to anybody. Neurodiversity is something you will all have some experience of, and I want to ask you a question. Now, I can't see whether you're replying, but if you could let Roxy know, how many of you either have yourself or know someone in your close circle who has autism, ADHD, attention deficit disorder without the hyperactivity, dyslexia, dyspraxia, or Tourette's? If you have in your immediate circle somebody with one of those conditions, or quite possibly more than one of those conditions, then you are living with someone who is neurodiverse. And that's all it means. It's an umbrella term that describes those conditions, and I'll explain why in a minute. Something like 1 in 7 of the UK population have at least one neurodiverse condition, and the chances are that's an underestimate, because that figure relies on people actually having been assessed and diagnosed, and we know an awful lot of people don't. Many of the people I coach are picking up the fact that they're neurodiverse, that they have dyslexia or ADHD on the back of their kids being assessed at school, or finding out as they get into a particular area of work that something isn't as easy as it seems to be for everybody else, and getting checked out then. So I've just realised I should be sharing my slides, shouldn't I, Roxy?
I didn't know if you were on that part yet.
Right, well, if I'll start from, okay.
No, you're fine, you're good. There we go.
I am, but I've gone in on the wrong one, haven't I? Okay,
me and Sue and tech have the best relationship, don't we, Sue?
And there is a very good reason for this.
Absolutely.
And that's because at the grand old age of 62, I found out something that I kind of suspected about myself, which is that I have dyspraxia, which is one of the neurodiverse conditions. And what, if anybody's even heard of dyspraxia, and you can let Roxy know whether you have, because frankly, a lot of people have heard of dyslexia. Everybody's pretty much heard of autism, but dyspraxia is one of those conditions that isn't all that well known. And if you do know about it, you think it's about people falling over or spilling stuff, which I do on a regular basis, as Roxy will tell you.
Yes.
But it also affects how I take in and process information, and stuff like this can be a bit of a challenge. So, for example, I've now full screen shared my slides, and I've no idea how to move to the next one. Hey.
Right. Well, we can't see your full screen share, Sue.
Oh.
Just click that button again. I can just see them smaller.
No, you see, I can't see the button now. Oh, hang on a minute. No, I can't see the button that lets me do that. Let's come out of share.
Yeah, just press escape on your screen.
Yeah, I've done that.
And then at the top, just where it says enable editing, just enable it, because that might be what's stopping it sharing.
Ah, okay.
Maybe.
No, well, that would make sense. Except I can't see that bit now.
Right at the top on a yellow bar.
No, it's because I put the sodding thing on full screen. I can't see the bar.
And to be fair, so much, press escape and it will get you out of full screen.
Okay, where am I? Escape, yes.
Right. Yellow bar that says enable editing.
Yes, but big.
At the top.
Got it. Okay, I've got that.
Go back to screen share. Let's see what we can do.
Go back to the beginning. I am sorry about this. This is what happens when you don't do a practice run.
It's a great example of neurodiverse stuff.
It actually is, because right. So I've got that. I now want to come back to. Where's my screen share button gone?
Waggle your
There's my screen share button.
Right, hang on then.
And there are my slides. Okay, share.
I don't even have a screen share. Oh, hang on.
And, okay, so now if I go to...
If you make them big, full screen again.
So I do... And that was the little button down there. Yeah. Which for some reason it's not doing. So enable editing, yes. Get off.
Sorry, everyone.
Oh, hang on. Oh, dear me. Right.
Oh, ladies.
That's right. I'll give this. This should.
Right, now do that button. Let's hope we're in.
Yes.
Yes, right. Now to move along, use your arrow keys. There we go.
Got it.
Right,
Got it.
in.
So, neurodiversity and untapped potential, the potential to fuck up a really straightforward screen presentation.
Spat my tea out.
Sorry. Neurodiversity, what does it mean? It's, as I said, it's about that group of conditions that are about the way we take in and process information. It's not about being stupid or not being able to learn. It's a difference in processing. And it's a natural process because we need people who think in different ways. We're now starting to think of these different ways of thinking as an evolutionary advantage. So that in the Stone Age, you had someone who could figure out how to make a wheel perfectly round, and the rest of the world would have fallen down around them while they were working that out. That person might have been autistic. Somebody else would not be able to concentrate on that, but would be sitting up, being distracted by everything around them, working out whether that was a threat or potential something to eat. And that person might have been dyslexic or had ADHD.
Okay.
Because we were working in clans and tribes of 100, 150, all of those differences were a really useful evolutionary advantage, because it meant as a pack, there was somebody looking out, somebody concentrating, somebody looking after the kids and making sure they didn't fall down and hurt themselves. Okay, that's my take on it. About 1 in 7 people that we know of, as I said, are neurodiverse in one way or another, and about 700,000, that should say, people in the UK are autistic. I'm just going to make this next point and then move on. Neurodiversity does not affect intellectual ability. It does not mean you're stupid. It's present at all levels of intelligence. And Albert Einstein, and one of my own heroes, a black woman called Dr. Maggie Aderin Pocock, who is Britain's premier space scientist and is dyspraxic like me and dyslexic. They're our heroes. They're our poster boys and girls. I'm going to move on to the next slide. And I've talked about that. Neurodiversity covers autistic spectrum conditions, including Asperger's. You might notice that I haven't said autism is sometimes referred to as ASD, which means autistic spectrum disorders. I don't talk about disorders, and neither does the company I work most with, Genius Within. We talk about conditions, but not disorders. Being autistic in and of itself is not a disorder. It's a difference, and it can have some really difficult consequences for people. ADHD, that's attention deficit. The DISs, as we're starting to call them, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia for some people, which is specifically about difficulty writing, and Tourette's, which people know about in a cliched sort of way as somebody who swears uncontrollably. That's one aspect for some people with Tourette's. But again, it's not an intellectual disability. It doesn't affect people's ability to think and contribute to the world. Now, I'm going to move on past this one because I made a basic mistake thinking this is lovely and colourful, so it will attract attention, but it's unreadable. And I put it in because some people with dyslexia struggle with black text on a white background, which is this version of that slide. But as you can see, for most people, this is a lot easier to read. And I wanted to show you this because it shows beautifully how those conditions overlap and why we talk about neurodiversity as a group of conditions, because most people with a neurodiverse condition will also have at least shades of one of the others. So people on the autistic spectrum, and this isn't my slide, so I haven't been able to alter the disorder bit on there, will have social and communication problems, probably very, very focused specialist interests rather than obsessive. We're going to have to redo this slide, Jodie. No, yes, Jodie. Hello, Jodie. But Roxy, I'm talking to you. Differences in imagination. People often think people on the autistic spectrum have no imagination. They have fantastic imaginations, and they are the people who will come up with a completely out of the box idea about a process, a piece of work that needs doing.
And that on its own, that on its own is just a fascinating thing, because how many times in corporate situations do we hear managers and bosses saying, can we have some out of the box thinking? And yet the conditions around working in a lot of corporate environments are still very singular in the way that people must sit and behave. And yet they're asking for different kinds of thinking.
Absolutely. And it's corporate environments are something else again.
I know.
People who are dyspraxic, like me, there are difficulties with motor function. So it might be somebody who trips over their own feet, a child who has real difficulty learning to tie laces, telling right from left, difficulty learning to ride a bike, may not crawl in infancy.
Okay.
If you get an overlap between those two things, between autism and dyspraxia, and it's quite common, you get can you see on the Venn diagram that over and under sensitive to light, touch, temperature, all sorts of things. I'm not moving around to dyslexia, which is the other one that people tend to know well. Difficulty with reading, writing and spelling, preference for non-linear thought, that's putting it mildly. Somebody with dyslexia will see the bigger picture, will see connections that nobody else will make, but just the process of learning to read and write, because it's about processing information, can hold people back enormously. ADHD, people talk about impulsive temper outbursts, hyperactivity, or just appearing very bored and away with the fairies if there isn't that hyperactivity. Easily distracted or over focused. If somebody with ADHD goes into hyperfocus, the house could fall down around them, but it's not well controlled. You'll see there's a square box in the middle of all those round shapes, and it's because for all of those neurodiverse conditions, there are overlaps around difficulties with organisation, memory, different sorts of memory, concentration, perception and sequencing. In other words, what we call the executive skills, and they're not skills for executives, they're the skills that mean you can execute day-to-day boring admin tasks or keep your household straight. Boring is my word because I'm dyspraxic and I find it boring and difficult. So those, they all overlap. a lot of the time, and B, these are the main difficulties that those conditions carry. If you have a child with ADHD or dyspraxia, trying to get them out of the house with all their clothes on, the bag they need for school, and their lunch money will be frustrating, hard work, and you will be tearing your hair out wondering why this child can't do something as simple as put their shoes on when you ask them to.
Yeah.
So I'm now going to move over to the pretty talented side of neurodiversity.
Yay.
Because the other side of all that difficulty are the skills that come with these conditions, and again they overlap. So for example, again, if you look at, and this is a Genius Within slide, so it's ASC for autistic spectrum conditions, not bloody disorders. Excuse me, it's a bit of a you will see attention to detail and long-term memory, and there's an overlap with dyspraxia around honesty, actually whether you want people to be honest or not, because the social norms about whether it's okay to say your bum looks fat in that's a bad example, but are not as well formed as they are in other people. For dyspraxia, empathy and persistence, and you can argue about whether the persistence is because life is just a struggle, so we've learned to persist because it's the only way of getting through life, or whether it's an innate part of having dyspraxia. And there's a reference there to DCD, which I won't use because it means developmental coordination disorder, and I'm not a disordered person. I'm somebody who falls over their own feet occasionally and has trouble organising myself, but I'm not disordered. I am the way I am, and I can work well in the world with the right sort of mindset from myself and approach from other people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can I just touch on that honesty one for autism spectrum conditions? I think that's the one that I think of the most when I think of autism randomly. Because it is almost that, it's the fact that the social skills part of honesty almost appear to be missing.
Yeah.
And is that something that can be learned? Can they learn to read body language and know what's an appropriate thing to say? Or is it something that will generally be there forever and it's up to us to understand it?
It's an absolutely brilliant question, Jodie. And I'm no,
why are you talking
Jodie?
I know you met Jodie.
Roxy, I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's fine.
It's a brilliant question, and I'm really glad you asked it. That social skills bit is missing, and it's missing to a greater or lesser extent. All of these are spectrum conditions, so people will have, it's like a pick and mix menu, and the degree to which you have problems with one aspect of it and less problems with another aspect of it are different in all of them. But with the honesty and lack of social awareness with autism, people, girls and women in particular, do learn to model social acceptability. So because girls socialize more than boys, and there is evidence of that, but socialization for girls is more important than it is for boys. So a little boy who plays obsessively with a train in a corner is seen as less of a problem or less unusual than a little girl who won't play dollies in the Wendy house with everybody else. But because girls and women notice that they don't fit, want to fit, and then model what their peers are doing, autism in particular, and a lot of the others, goes underdiagnosed in girls and women because they are masking, and that's the term that people with autism will use. They mask to appear normal. When they realise what they're doing, they will mask to appear normal, and that comes at a tremendous cost, because the amount of energy it takes to behave in a way that you think is acceptable to other people, but you're not able to directly read those signals. So
can I just ask another question?
Yeah.
Sorry. And you might not know the answer to this, and it might be something I go out and figure out. Is there a gender difference in who has these conditions, or is there just a gender difference, do we think, in who is diagnosed with them?
It's always been said that boys are more susceptible to autism, dyspraxia, dyslexia, and ADHD. There's a lot of thinking now that whilst there might be a higher level of prevalence amongst boys, it's almost certainly much less than we thought it was, because we look for those conditions in boys, we notice them more, and because girls, generally speaking, and as a feminist I don't like generalizing about girls and women, but generally speaking, girls and women, unless they belong to this outfit, will be more compliant and will be trying harder to fit in than a boy might.
Okay.
So the jury's out really on whether these conditions are really more prevalent amongst boys and men, or whether it's just that we look for it in boys and men, and girls and women are better at shielding it, at masking it.
That's really interesting.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But those strengths that are listed on this screen, these are the reasons why, if you go back to what I said earlier about the overall community needing different styles of thinking, these are where those strengths come in, and they're at the expense of some other things. So people with dyslexia are visual thinkers, may have mechanical skills. So architects, engineers are often dyslexic.
Okay.
A lot of people in the health service are dyslexic, but because they've got the empathy and the communication skills to make relationships with people, it often doesn't show up until they're doing really high level exams. And that's the other thing, going back to one of the earlier slides, these conditions in and of themselves don't affect intellectual ability. They will often occur with learning disabilities and other disabilities that affect other things. But I work, and my colleagues work, with a number of doctors who, because their overall intellectual ability and drive is so high, have got through all their formal education, university, the first 2 or 3 years of their training, and it's only when they hit a level of reading and writing combined with practice that maybe 1% of the population have to cope with, that the problem might show up. And you would never have known at school that that person was dyslexic, but when it comes to preparing for their GP exams, suddenly you can tell there's a barrier.
Okay.
So I'm going to one other thing to say about this talented slide is that something like 35% of entrepreneurs, and I know this is an audience who are interested in people who have the drive to run their own business, 35% of entrepreneurs are dyslexic, and it's not because they don't fit in big organisations, although big organisations don't benefit them greatly. It's because there's that innovation, that drive, the ability to see something that nobody else has seen. And examples are people like Richard Branson, Steve Jobs. Albert Einstein was probably dyslexic and dyspraxic. He would say that he could barely write. He had difficulty dressing himself, and he was officially a genius, which is why this company is called Genius Within. Is it okay if I move on a bit? Is being neurodiverse a disability? I've put this slide in because it's it's a difficult area. A lot of people with neurodiverse conditions will reject the disability label. Yeah. Because we are saying we're different, we're not disabled, we're different. But the way that society is organised disables us in some ways. And it's an important area to recognise, because as those conditions are recognised under the Equalities Act and the impact that having those conditions has on your day-to-day life, that's a gateway for protection and resources, whether you're a child at school who really ought to be given a keyboard instead of being made to write, or whether you're an adult at work who could do with read-write software instead of having to use a keyboard. Right.
Okay.
So although it's not a label people like, it's important to recognise it, A, so that the people around someone who's neurodiverse make the sorts of adjustments that mean they can thrive, and also just to recognise the level of difficulty that these conditions can cause. I'm going to move on. No, I'm not. I'm going to go back to that. Most of you, has anybody heard of the social model of disability? Does that ring any bells for people who are watching or listening in? Does that mean anything to you?
No, it doesn't. And I sort of think I know quite a bit about neurodiversity, but no, I don't know that.
Right, well, this comes from the mainstream disability movement, who will say, my legs don't work, therefore I use a wheelchair some or all of the time. It's not the fact that my legs don't work that stops me getting into a shop. That's not the disability. The disability is caused by the environment that means I can't get on a bus in my wheelchair, or I can't get in through the entrance to a building because there's no ramp, or the automatic doors swing out and I can't reach the button without getting hit in the face by the door. And it's the difference between what the condition you have stops you doing or makes difficult, and the way the world is organised around you impacts on you. So the social model of disability is that a lot of the time it's not the condition you have that disables you, it's the organisation of the world around you that doesn't make enough adjustment to enable you to live as easily as other people.
That feels massive to me, Sue. Sorry, that feels like a huge thing to me. I'm really, I love it. I'm trying to kind of gather my thoughts on that, because that makes so much more sense than like marginalising people who can't use their legs, which is a great example. Yeah, I'm just gathering myself with that one, because I want to know a bit more.
It's huge, and with somebody who is a wheelchair user or who is blind and is using a stick or has a dog, you can see the impact, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
With neurodiverse conditions, you can't. They are invisible conditions, and I hope, stop me if I'm going over time.
No, you're fine.
An example of this that really captures it for me is that if you think about how long we have assumed that everybody should be able to read and write as a main means of communication, we're actually going back less than 200 years in this country to the introduction of the Elementary Education Act in 1880. Okay, that's not 200 years, that's 120. 1880 to 2020. It's 140 years.
Yeah, I'm the worst person to ask about that.
It's a very long time,
but
it's not a very long time. The reason I'm mentioning that is that before that there was no requirement for children to go to school. And people grew up in communities, and skills and ideas were passed on through oral traditions, things being spoken, people learning their trades through traditional apprenticeships. You'd learn to be a craftsman by watching somebody doing apprentice pieces, practicing more and more, but you wouldn't be taking an exam in it. So if you happen to be dyslexic, the fact that you couldn't read and write was not a disability. Because in many contexts of life, most of the people around you weren't reading and writing either. It only becomes a real problem when the way that you're expected to communicate with the rest of the world is through black squiggles on white paper or screens.
So it's it's when we're designing what we, as a collective, are going to view as the norm. We're excluding so much of the stuff, and that's something, like, in and by itself is something I'm dead passionate about with my children, is this whole idea of conformity and being able to do things the right way. Like, my kids have kind of 2 rules for their life. I lecture them on these rules the whole time, and they're be kind. My first rule is always you be kind, but my second rule is try your best. And that comes back to a lot of stuff for me around how we define what achievement is. And so doing well at school, whatever we're defining is you're doing brilliantly. My question will always come back to, did you do your best? Because for me, that's everything. And I nearly think that I'm lucky, because my 5-year-old certainly is dead smart, so I'm lucky. But more importantly, he's lucky that he doesn't have to have the challenges that come with a neurodiverse condition. But still, I hope that I bring him up in the way that, providing he's trying his best, he doesn't have to fit in, he doesn't have to do what everyone else is doing. But equally, in the big wide world, that's not going to play out for him for his whole life.
It's not, but and I wouldn't underplay the level of stress and anxiety and depression that people with all of these conditions suffer from. And but those stresses and anxieties and depressions are not an inherent part of the neurodiverse condition. They're bloody caused by a world that makes it difficult for you to function. So in our current climate, for example, we've got lots of people who are working from home in their own space. For somebody who has autism, being out of a busy office in a familiar space where they can set things out exactly as they want them, for some people who are autistic, that will be their idea of heaven. They haven't got to make social chit chat and try and work out whether so and so is going to be offended if you say something. Because believe me, autistic people are not insensitive to the effects they have on other people. They don't want to upset other people. They just don't get the rules. So they'll go quiet and not say anything rather than risk saying something that might cause an upset. Or just assume that they are awkward, that they don't fit, they are a misfit, and that's who they are. And so they might as well stop trying to fit in. And that brings its own problems. But the changes that we're having now in how we work and not being in big open plan offices, for some people with neurodiverse conditions, it works really well because we are the people who see an innovative solution and a different way of doing things. We may have trouble focusing, but when we do focus, our focus is like a laser. And if you take away all the distractions, that makes it easier. So going back to what you were saying about Charlie and fitting into the world is changing, and there's a real argument that says those neurodiverse strengths that I talked about on this slide, empathy, persistence, energy and passion, loving change, visual thinking, attention to detail and problem solving, they are all the skills we need now to work in the world as we now have it. I mean, how much more work are all of us doing online and finding different ways of delivering the things that we do? So that whole question about a disability is a bigger question than it looks. And it's trying to strike the balance between recognizing the extent of impairment, as in difficulty, that a condition might cause, and recognizing that that's coming from the environment around you rather than part of you. Can I give one last example of that, Roxy? Running on. If you look at how human beings develop all over the world and how children develop, unless they are really being neglected, every child by and large, will learn to walk, learn to feed themselves, learn what's dangerous and what's not, perhaps at the expense of burning themselves or falling over, and they will acquire speech. They will learn to speak in whatever the language is in the community in which they grow up. That's because those are innate developmental abilities that, unless there is an actual disability that prevents hearing or speech, children will acquire those things. You have to be taught to read and write because it's not a basic human skill. And there's an argument now that says that in order to learn to read and write, our brains borrow from different parts to acquire that skill. There are speech centers in the brain, there are movement centers, there are other centers where if you ask somebody to do something, you can see that bit of the brain light up. There isn't a reading and writing center in the brain. It's something we have acquired as a means of communication. And for some people, associating a sound and a meaning with those shapes, which we call words, is a real problem. And that's dyslexia. And for other people, the mechanical skills of even forming the letters is a problem, because it's an acquired skill. It's not part of who we are.
Okay.
And there's an argument that says, with the amount we're using keyboards now, that the ability to handwrite is becoming more or less redundant.
Which I can totally believe. And in some, this sounds strange, but in some ways, so like my son is expected to start doing cursive writing as of next year, which for me, I have no understanding of why that's necessary, why you would be wasting time on that. It seems utterly ridiculous to me that he has to learn cursive. It's old-fashioned in my opinion. It kind of, and I don't understand why we're putting such an emphasis on something like that, when he could be going and doing something extra musical or extra cool in whatever way that is. Learning cursive handwriting seems to be outdated.
It is outdated, and it's because that's how our education system is set up. When we started putting children into school, it was to create a compliant, conforming body of people who could then go and work in factories or the military or wherever, and who would behave nicely, do as they were told, and not think beyond the confines of the job they've been given. And you can, my personal opinion is that you can still see that in school. You're absolutely right. Why on earth would you still be doing cursive writing? Nothing they read in a book or on a screen is going to be in a cursive script unless they want to be a flipping archivist.
Which they might. We've actually got an archivist in our group. She's not here, but we do. Come and say hi, Claire. But yeah, and at six, how is that deemed as the most important skill they could be learning at this time?
Well, if you want them to develop the skills to solve a problem or tell a story, but you're saying you have to do it in this way that makes you have to do it in this really cramped style and it has to be this shape.
Yeah.
How much of their attention are they able to spend on developing that story or that idea? And how much of it is on doing this and then being told off because you can't write on the line or you haven't put enough of a space between the words with, and
even bigger than that, how much is then they don't want to do it. So they don't want to tell a story and they don't want to do this creative stuff because they're being put into, Claire is here, because they're being put into a very prescriptive way that they must tell that story. No, I think we've gone off track, but I totally support that idea that we're forcing people into a box that as a society we're now recognising is unnecessary and not effective, yet we're continuing to do it at the moment. And I really do hope that changes. So what can we do, I guess, to support people around us that we know to be neurodiverse?
What we can do is to not make assumptions. So it's things like please don't say, oh, you don't look autistic and you're out for a drink with your mates. Well, what should I look like?
Yeah.
Should I have 2 heads? Should I have a hump on my back?
Okay.
Should I be sitting in a corner? Oh, you can't be dyslexic because you can read. Well, yes, I've worked really bloody hard and I had supportive parents.
Mm-hmm.
So don't make assumptions. Do recognise that that person has potential and something to teach you. And be honest about the difficulties. So it's really straightforward. Don't make assumptions.
Yeah.
Ask somebody what they need to work at their best.
Okay.
You need a quiet corner. In recruitment terms, for a lot of people with neurodiverse conditions, would you like the questions in advance? Because thinking on the spot is not a skill.
Okay. Yeah.
And you'll get more out of the responses. And ask people what they need.
Okay.
They won't always know.
Yeah.
That's part of what I do in coaching, is saying, well, how about we try this?
Yeah.
And
also that knowing what you want, you say need, I have to say want, as you know, knowing what you want to help you work better is developing a skill in itself to sort of start figuring out how you know yourself. So I cannot work on my laptop with music on. I'd love to, and I love the idea. And Tom does all the time. And if me and Tom are in the same room, I cannot work. I cannot put my focus where I want it to be. But that's something that I think it took me a while to recognise what it was that was making me not efficient at this point. And the skill of knowing yourself is a hard skill to come by. So yeah.
Absolutely. And if you've grown up thinking it's your fault, you're a bit thick, you're just not trying hard enough, being asked what would make it better for you is a really difficult question to answer, because you've never thought about it in those terms. And that's why I do the coaching that I do, because I can say to somebody, what would the difference be if you didn't have to write emails? But we have to write emails. But what would the difference be if you didn't have to write emails?
Okay.
What would it be like if you picked up the phone more, or if you had some speech to text, text to speech software? And incidentally, for people listening, if any of you are dyslexic or your kids are dyslexic and you want to give it a try, if you're running Office 365 on your computers, there is a voice function, and I think it's across the whole suite, but it certainly works in Word, where you can just dictate into your computer and it will write for you. You can go in and edit it then, but if you find it easier to speak your ideas, which I definitely do, Roxy will tell you, trying to get me to turn a piece of written work in is active. But if you give me the opportunity to explain something, and now I know for myself that if I record that, it becomes much easier then to edit it. And you don't need specialist software for that. Office 365 will do that for you. If you find writing texts hard work, don't write the text. There's a microphone. If you've got a smartphone, there is a mic on your phone that you can use in messages, in text. And if you speak what you want to say, it will write it for you. It's not a voice message. It will write the text for you. And you don't have to do the
typing,
which I find really difficult, and so do quite a lot of other people.
Yeah. Thank you. That's really, really interesting. Right, I'm just going to have a quick flick through comments, but I think we've kind of covered everything. But Laura's on, and she said, when I said, can it be learned, the whole masking, honesty, the social skills part, she said she used to be a doctor and saw it a lot in patients, the masking, exactly as you describe. Kate says, the stuff you said made so much sense in relation to all conditions. I've missed which bit you were relating that to, Katie, sorry. Claire's saying she's here. She hasn't shouted at me for saying stop handwriting. Katie again says there's so many things about the education system she finds hard to understand the long-term benefit of. And then she talks about there's a complete lack of allowance for individuality or personal learning methods in work and schools in general, I think. Wonderful. So thank you, Sue. If people want to know some more, where can they get some extra resources from?
I've set, there's a there's a neurodiversity frequently asked questions sheet,
Download, yeah.
which anybody can download, and I'll sort out with you where they're going to download.
I'll put it in our members club. I've got a copy of it.
Brilliant.
But on your next slide, you've got some more resources.
Yes, lots. What you'll see on there is you can get more information from me. I don't know all the answers. I won't pretend to. There is fantastic information about neurodiversity generally on the Genius Within website.
Yeah.
And then I have put in the Dyspraxia Foundation, made by Dyslexia, the British Dyslexia Association. Any of those people will give you really good information. And I've included a couple of references about neurodiversity at work. One is the GMB. You don't have to be a member of the GMB union to benefit from this brilliant toolkit, because it just explains things fantastically. And the Chartered Institute of Personal Development also have a really good guide. So if you're having a struggle at work and you think that you might be being treated unfairly, or at least with a lack of consideration, have a look at those guides. And on the fact sheet, I've added in contact details for the National Autistic Society, the ADHD national charity as well. So amazing. If people are wondering whether they might, or someone they know might or might not have a condition, there are a couple of self-profiling tools around. Genius Within have one, and the reference to the other one is on the fact sheet.
Yeah.
And the other thing, if it's okay to say, Roxy, is if anyone wants to follow this up and wants a half-hour conversation with me about it, I can do that as a one-off for Ladies Life Lounge members for 40 quid, if anybody's interested.
Right. Well, just as you were finishing off there, Laura says that she suspects she may have ASC. So Laura, on that fact sheet that's coming, but I'll message you anyway, there's like a test for yourself, but then she's put, if someone suspects they may have a neurodiverse condition, where would you recommend they start? So I'm guessing you're going to say Genius Within?
Genius Within, or Genius Within, or the Do It profiler, which is on
the fact sheet. Yeah.
And any of those main charities, if you think if you've a suspicion that it's a particular condition, they've nearly all got checklists, so that you can just literally start doing a tick box checklist. How many of these characteristics do you recognise in yourself? And that'll give you an indication. My rule of thumb is, if you think you may have one of these conditions, the chances are that you do. And can I say one final thing, going back to how do you help? Please don't say, however well-meaningly, to anyone who does have one of these conditions, oh, we're all on a spectrum somewhere. No, we're fucking not. It takes a lot of time and effort to get a diagnosis of any of these things. People say it in a well-meaning way. Believe you me, if you've got one of those conditions, in some ways it will make your life a trial. In other ways, it will make it fantastic. But it's not I fall over as well.
Yep. Fabulous, Sue. Thank you. So yeah, if you want a session with Sue, £40, that's brilliant. I will put all her details on the bottom of this post when it's finished live. If you need anything, you can come through me anyway. I will put you in direct contact with my darling Sue. The fact sheet has got loads of information on. I had a look at it earlier, so I will post that underneath here, and then it will also be uploaded to the members club with this masterclass. All right, so no more questions, Laura. I hope that's answered yours, but I'll pick up with you in a minute anyway. And yes, so thank you so much, Sue. It's been fabulous.
Thank you for giving me the chance to do it. It's brilliant.
You're so welcome. It's been really, really interesting. And I'm someone who thought I knew some things, and actually I've learned a heck of a lot more today. So that's fab.
Brilliant.
All right. Have a wonderful Wednesday.
Yeah.
Have a wonderful Wednesday. Stay safe, and I will talk to you all soon. Lots of thank yous are coming through now, Sue. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, my darling.
All right. See you soon.